I am so happy because look at my hairpins. They match my top and my necklace. So a month ago or so, I was on the Dr. Stone Reddit, and if you have no idea what Dr. Stone is about, but you're still here because you're a loyal subscriber of mine, which I doubt is the case, here's a quick summary for you. So Dr. Stone is an anime that's set in our current modern times, and one day, all the people on this world, the entire humanity, gets suddenly turned into stones. They don't die, they of course don't age because they're stones, and they remain that way for 3,700 years. So naturally, the civilization collapses, all the modern infrastructure is gone, and there's forests and vines everywhere. So we are essentially back to the Stone Age and back to the primitive times. And 3,700 years later, our main protagonist, Senku, manages to break out of stone and decides to restore the civilization and also find out what caused this petrification. Petrification as in, everyone turning into stones all those years ago. So as Senku and his other friends who also managed to break out of their petrification, as they explore, they find out that there exist other human settlements besides theirs.
このストーンワールドに俺らの他に誰かいる。人類が他に
However, those settlements show no signs of modern science or any recollection of the modern 21st century. Like, if those people would see anything scientific, they would call it witchcraft. Yeah, we're dealing with that. One such settlement is called the Petrification Kingdom, and that's what my video is based on today. So a month ago when I was on the Dr. Stone Reddit, somebody was talking about what crimes have all these characters committed in the stone world that has no government, no ruler, no sovereign. And then somebody mentioned the crimes that characters like Ibara and Moz committed. So Ibara and Moz are these two disgusting villains from this primitive settlement called the Petrification Kingdom. It's called the Petrification Kingdom because the ruler, the monarch of this kingdom, has a weapon that can turn people into stone. And that's what they do. Anybody who tries to run away from the kingdom or breaks the kingdom's customary law gets turned into stone. And I'll not reveal how that happens in case some of you decide to watch the anime because I don't want to spoil it a lot. But I will spoil some bits, guys, because I'm making a video essay. Anyways, so the approach that Senku has is that all these criminals will be brought forth to a court for all the crimes they have committed once the civilization is restored. However, as another Redditor mentioned, it brings forward the question that can people like Ibara and Moz be tried using the modern laws? Is it justified for them to be given the verdict of being guilty when seemingly they did not break any customary law of this Petrification Kingdom? And honestly, this topic really interested me, and as I was researching about this, because I've never studied a thing about law before, and this is going to be your only disclaimer going forward. I'm not a law student. Whatever I say, my opinions might not be facts, okay? Okay, so let's talk a bit about the Petrification Kingdom first. It's an island, and there exists a tyrannical ruler that the residents call the Master. The Master spokesperson, or the authoritative figure that enforces the rules on behalf of him, is this creepy, perverted man called Ibara. And there also exists a very strong soldier called Moz that deals with people who break the customary law and also guards the inner palace. And the inner palace is where the master's harem takes place. So every year the master sends out Ibara and his forces to seek out beautiful women from the kingdom's villages. It doesn't matter if they're married, and get them back to the inner palace for his harem. Now, it's very strongly implied that Ibara has raped the women in the inner palace.
そんな緊張しないで銀ちゃん。ほら、安全かもわかんない。なってない輩を当主様と二人にするわけにもいかないでしょ。その前におじちゃんがね、いろいろラブラブで教えてあげることになってるの。
And Moz too is a predator. He sexualizes women way younger than him, sometimes when they're literally just girls. He has no sense of right or wrong, and it's also kind of implied that he may have also women in the inner palace.
もったいない。超もったいない。結構可愛い子いいんじゃん。特にさ、ちらっと見えてる端の子。まだ子供すぎだけど、俺は見えるな。5年後は美人になるよ。あれ。
This claim is more strongly implied for Ibara than Moz. However, they both fall in the same category. So now, as per modern law, these guys are definitely criminals. Like, they're definitely serving some sentence, but legally, have they done anything to break the customary law of the Petrification Kingdom? Because in this kingdom, women's rights, it's not a concept. Women's rights aren't a part of their customs. So legally, are they in trouble? And is it okay for these modern people like Senku and his gang to come to this primitive settlement and then enforce their laws and their systems on them because Senku and the gang knows better? I don't know, it kind of screams colonialism. And before you guys say anything, I am not defending Ibara or Moz. I'm a big feminist and I hate these disgusting characters. I want them to rot and their dicks to be fed to the dogs, okay? I'm making my intentions clear. I'm just, talking philosophically. Something interesting that I found out while researching was that for primitive society, the Petrification Kingdom doesn't run like how it should. For instance, in primitive societies, there is no government, no leader, no sovereign. During times of disputes, they do appoint a temporary leader. However, their decision is not final or binding. If I have to draw a real-life parallel with the Petrification Kingdom, it would be North Korea, because there's a tyrannical ruler, nobody's allowed to leave the island, newcomers and outside information are not welcome to preserve the status quo, and scientific innovation is discouraged as this could possibly lead to a rebellion.
あれでしょ、おっさんたちの島でんな、新しいもん作んな。破れば当主様の血族が受け継ぐ妖術で石にする。
So it's a primitive society because change and new ideas aren't welcome, but its social institutions don't run like a primitive society. For instance, primitive societies generally favored compensation for a crime committed, so the criminal would have to offer some compensation, which would be mostly economic or financial, and then the society would like for the criminal and their victim to reconcile. But the modern law is more about bodily retribution. So for example, if you have committed a really bad crime, you could be executed or you would definitely serve some sentence in the prison. There is a strong emphasis on the proportionality of the punishment given to the criminal, it should be proportional to the crime they committed. And there's also the concept of kinship blame in primitive societies. What I mean by that is that if somebody commits a crime, then it's not just the criminal that gets questioned, but their family and their community also gets questioned and they're also held accountable. Questions like, how could you let this happen? And they are also put at fault. But in the modern world, there is more the concept of free will, that everyone has a free will that can exercise and nobody can control that free will. So I could be a good person while my brother could be a criminal, but his actions have got nothing to do with me. they're his own actions, and I should not bear that responsibility. So looking at the Petrification Kingdom, like, for every crime that anyone commits, they turn people into stone. I think it functions more like the modern law, because once somebody's turned into stone, like, there's no scope of them ever reconciling back into the society or compensating. They, while not technically dead, are kinda unalive. However, like, there's no concept of proportionality in this Petrification Kingdom. Because, like, what crimes are these people committing? Trying to run away from the island and being turned into stone for that? And I also don't remember seeing any blame put on the community here in the anime. Now, I'll take a slight tangent and get back to the point where I talked about how Senku subjecting criminals like Ibara and Moz to the modern laws kinda screams colonialism. It's kinda tricky to talk about, but please, hear me out, okay? So, I'm from India, and we used to be a British colony. And Britishers rightfully banned some of the very horrific Hindu rituals like sati, which was basically a ritual where a wife would commit suicide, the burning alive in fire once her husband dies. But oh, the husband didn't have to do the same if his wife died. He could just remarry. Anyways, so the Britishers rightfully banned such practices, and yay, I love it. It's awesome. But they also enforced Western systems of legality on us. They enforced a system of courts and doing a trial in the presence of a judge and everything. And I was a literature student. So I remember back in college reading a text written during the colonial times that talked about how villages had their own ways of dealing with crimes. So like there would be a committee that would be formed by the elderly of the village, and they would hold the person accountable who committed a crime, ask them to pay a fine, economic compensation, and resolve disputes. The process would be quick. However, since these court formalities were introduced where everyone has to present their case in front of a high-end magistrate, there was like rampant corruption. Corruption went to new higher levels, and so many cases were left pending, and a lot of people were not happy. They did not think that the justice system was doing justice. So yeah, while I would love for Senku to strongly intervene and stop these gender crimes against women in the Petrification Kingdom, I am not so sure about enforcing this foreign system on these people, because the current leader of the Petrification Kingdom is an awful ruler, no doubt, but I do wonder that under a new, sane, courteous, and responsible leader, how would the Petrification Kingdom's way of dealing with crimes look like? And it's kind of easy for Senku and the gang to stop these gendered crimes because the native people living in the Petrification Kingdom feel the same way. The women always feel unsafe and the men hate when their wives get taken away. They would gladly accept Senku's radical intervention, and the only reason they haven't done so yet themselves is because of the fear of being turned into stone. So that's perfect. I'm just not so sure about, enforcing this new system of lawyers and courts on these people. And as for the question, can Ibara and Moz be found guilty? Because by the modern standards, yes, they are definitely criminals. But did they break any customary law of their own society? Well, I believe that the answer is yes, because the native people of the Petrification Kingdom do not like them. They do see them as bad and evil people, and they don't like the system. To expand on this point, we first need to talk about how legality works in primitive societies. So primitive societies, they don't have a government or a ruler, hence they don't have codified laws, but they have customs. Social customs that everyone is expected to abide by. And this interesting research paper that I came across talked about that primitive societies were really big on property rights and individual rights. This is because these societies don't have a government or a leader that could use dictatorial force to make people abide by the customs. The primitive societies could not do that. They instead needed to have an incentive for people to voluntarily abide by these customs. And those incentives were their property rights and their individual rights. Like everyone had to benefit from it in some way for all of them to voluntarily accept and enforce these customs. So yeah, Tsukasa's view of living in a primitive society where everyone owns everything might not be exactly true. Expanding on this point further, no one person holds the absolute power in a primitive society. So for a law to change, it had to be gradually and collectively accepted by the society for it to be implemented. And the way it would happen would be, like taking the case of Kapaluku Papuans, a primitive settlement in the islands of New Guinea. Whenever a dispute arises, a temporary leader is appointed who's usually a rich person called a Tonowi, and these rich people are usually respected because they're generous with their money and they're skillful in their trade. Like, their rich status actually signifies their hardworking character and their skill in their trade, because like they had to be skillful and hardworking to be rich in the first place. So this Tonowi would come up with a solution for a dispute, but as I've already mentioned, nobody was obligated to go through with the solution. However, people would usually go with it because it would seem fair, and if the decision did turn out to be good, that is, there were no negative consequences, it would gradually get voluntarily accepted by the society, and in case of future similar disputes, the society would resort back to this solution that was given by the Tonowi. And the good thing about such system is that no one person has the power to change the laws overnight, and the legitimacy of the laws really depends on people's voluntary acknowledgement of them. Not just this, but the Tonowi had to stay consistent with their past decisions. For example, if they are dealing with a dispute right now that they have dealt with in past before too, this time they cannot just come up with like some new, different, outlandish solution. No. They would have to answer the people, they would be questioned, they would be held accountable, and they have to stay consistent with their past rulings. So coming back to Dr. Stone, the Petrification Kingdom voluntarily recognizes Ibara and Moz as bad people. They would love to adopt Senku's radical intervention and means that would get these people behind the bars and end their reign. I am just not so sure, like I said, about imposing on these people these modern law institutions of like courts and judiciary. Therefore, yes, Ibara and Moz can be tried using the modern law because their own customary law also sees them as bad people. And I believe this is how the Petrification Kingdom would have run, and like it would not have a dictator as a leader if the master did not have the petrification weapon that could turn people into stone. It's the presence of this weapon that made the power balance lopsided in favor of the master, and that's why the Petrification Kingdom runs like a dictatorship. I mean, heck, whenever anyone is about to turn into stone, one of the master's henchmen would scream something like, "Everyone, close your eyes, the master's wrath is coming."
当主様のお力が来るからね。目開けちゃダメよ。もろとも石化しちゃうからね。
This seems like it's divine rage, and these normal people should not witness this divine rage. And this is how primitive societies also functioned. Because there was no government or a leader, they usually relied on religion and the divine being to, hail justice in their societies. So yeah, coming back to the point, well, I do think that Moz and Ibara can be tried under the modern law. I'm just not so sure about putting the Petrification Kingdom under our modern legal systems.